Hi, it's Bruce Friedman, and this, of course, would be That's Brooklyn, and we're in Prospect Park, only the joggers and the bicyclers are something new. We're here to talk about something old but quite relevant, and that's the American Revolutionary War, and I have as my guest Bob Furman from the American, say that again,
First Battle Revival Alliance Heritage Trail Committee.
He took the words out of my mouth. That's the First Battle Revival Alliance Committee.
Heritage Trail Committee.
Well, now, you made it longer, but it's the Heritage Trail. Now, what do we mean by the Heritage Trail for the American Revolutionary War?
In 1776, the British invaded New York right after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. They ferried 30,000 men down from Halifax, landed in Staten Island, shipped them across the Narrows to Bay Ridge and Gravesend, and proceeded to roll up through Brooklyn with the express purposes of conquering New York. While they were eventually successful in this endeavor, the idea of the battle was to end the revolution by destroying the Continental Army and capturing its leadership. George Washington was able to withdraw the army and live to fight another day. The importance of this site is that it was pivotal in the battle.
Okay. Now, we're in a part of Prospect Park that we call the Valley Pass.
Valley Grove Pass, yes. Now, Valley Grove Pass is one of a series of passes through the terminal moraine hills that traverse northern Brooklyn, all the way from the Brooklyn-Queens line at the Cemetery of the Evergreens. Well, you don't see it much anymore, but through Bedford-Stuyvesant, then through Brooklyn Botanical Garden, here, and then the Greenwood Cemetery. It was necessary at the time of the battle for an army to follow the roads through the hills, through the passes, in order to get around Brooklyn.
But you were telling me earlier that this is a very hilly northern section of Brooklyn.
Yes, it is, and this is the only place where you can really still see what it was like in 1776.
Since Prospect Park was built in the 1860s, we had 100 years prior to that for the Battle of Brooklyn, once known as the Battle of Long Island for the American Revolution. Were the designers of this park, Olmsted and Vaux, did they pay attention to the historical relevance?
Well, they certainly did. It was one of the priorities in the park design was to preserve this site. The road we're standing on, which is the East Drive of Prospect Park, at this point follows the course of the colonial roads, which were at this right here would have been the Flatbush Road, which was the colonial version of Flatbush Avenue. And a little bit further up, where it starts turning to the left, that's the Port Road, which leads down to Gowanus, down today's First Street. Because this was such an important place, it was preserved as far as they could within the context of the park's design. This was a real road. This was the main post road, if you will, between Brooklyn, which was up in the Heights in downtown Brooklyn, and the town of Flatbush, which is where it is today. The Heritage Trail is a proposal of our organization that would follow the course of the battle from the British invasion in Bay Ridge along their routes of advance through the passes and to all of the sites that were related to the battle and other important sites in the Revolutionary War. From here down to the old stone house in Gowanus.
The whole idea is it's been restored. It now is a museum where school groups as well as parents, guardians, and their children can visit. Can you give us any detail about the old stone house itself?
Do you mean the reconstruction of it today or its role in the battle?
Please start with its role in the battle.
Okay, the importance of the old stone house in the battle was that it is on the crossroads between the Port Road, which begins here, and the Gowanus Road, which was the main route from there to Brooklyn. As such, it was a good place to mount a military defense. So at the point at which it became clear to George Washington that the battle was lost and that he had to evacuate the army, he decided that they had to delay the British advance. So what they did was have a contingent of soldiers attack the British who were entrenched at that time in the Old Stone House to prevent their further advance. Now that contingent was based around a Maryland brigade, and it was led by William Alexander Lord Sterling, an American general.
You know, John, there's an expression that youth is wasted on the young.
Right.
Well, I would think you'd agree, so is history. History is wasted on the young because when you get a little older, you start to appreciate what is your surroundings.
Well, that's because you have your own history. You know, the youth, they're just doing things. They're going out and trying to establish themselves as mature adults and establish themselves in life. Now we, at a later stage of age, much later stage in some cases, have the time to reflect and see how we fit in all this history. It'd be wonderful. One of the things this Old Stone House Center is doing is reaching out to other history organizations and other organizations with history. We're not just, our mandate is the Revolutionary War and such, but we're reaching beyond. On our events, we're talking with other historical groups, with groups like the Visiting Nurse Association, which was founded in Brooklyn 125 years ago. Now, who knows that fact?
Now, just recently, there was a ceremony held at 8th Street and 3rd Avenue because that's believed to be the central burying ground for those Maryland troops.
That's correct. After that skirmish, the British were left in control of the field and had the responsibility of burying the dead. Based on anecdotal evidence from the period and a certain amount of genuine evidence, the opinion is that they were buried in higher ground on the Van Brunt farm in the vicinity of 8th Street and 3rd Avenue. An excavation was done there by the National Park Service in the 1950s, which did not find anything. We are hoping to be able to repeat that exercise in adjacent areas that are unbuilt, which is, of course, a restriction on how much you can explore. But today we have the advantage of modern technology, like ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetometry, which will indicate, for example, the original grade of the ground. If there's anything significant underground, it'll even find skeletons, which might be down there.
Now, it says on the top of this plaque, site of the Dongan Oak.
Yeah, this was the front of the American line. There was an American line here because as it passed through the hills, this was the main way the British would have to come up. There was an army of Hessians encamped down in Flatbush, down near the church on the Dutch Reformed Church.
Church in Flatbush.
Yes, a church in Flatbush. And it was expected that the Hessians would advance up the Flatbush Road through here and then try to get to downtown Brooklyn. Now, in order to block that, the Americans deployed about 1,500 men, I think, in this area. Now, this was the front of it, and what they did was take a large oak tree that marked the boundary between Brooklyn and Flatbush and cut it down and lay it across the Flatbush Road at this point as an obstruction to their passage. And that has become fabled in song and story of old Brooklyn. And this marks the site of the Dongan Oak. Now, some of these plaques have information on them which isn't quite right, but most of it is, so it is important that people see it. What's also important is that they have some understanding of what happened here and probably also of what the place actually looked at the time, which is a representation of what it would have looked like.
Well, just a bit earlier, but a century later, in the 1960s, my gang from Erasmus Hall High School used to hang out on the steps of the Dutch Reformed Church, corner of Church and Flatbush, and sometimes we made our way to downtown Brooklyn, just like our troops did. only we were on our way to the Brooklyn Paramount Theater for an Alan Freed rock and roll show, which somehow doesn't seem to have the same significance as what happened 200 years earlier.
Well, it almost does.
Well, the music has lasted. Okay.
Certainly started something, didn't it?
Okay. Now, what we're going to do next is walk up the hill the same way that these troops did.
Right.
And we're going to take a look at what's coming next.
What's coming next is the actual Valley Grove Pass itself, which obstructed it's a bottleneck basically in the path of anyone who's trying to come up the Flatbush Road. And as such, it's a good point for defense because you can concentrate fire and try and use this bottleneck to prevent an army from passing through.
If you break a twig, then you know how to get back on the same route.
We're on the top of Redoubt Hill, which seems to be where an American battery of 2 cannons was located during the battle. The intersection of the port and Flatbush roads, which is what you want to be preventing the British from getting to. So we believe that there was a small fort on the top of this hill. There's a research project being done by my organization about the ethnic breakdown of the Continental Army during the Battle of Brooklyn. It's also of interest that the British offered many African slaves in the United States their freedom if they would fight on their side, and quite a few did. So apparently blacks were involved on both sides.
Fulton Ferry Landing, which has already been restored and rebuilt, and it's just at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge.
And so certainly the monument in Fort Greene Park is an important one. I think your audience might be interested in the fact that Fort Greene Park was, at the time of the American Revolution, Fort Putnam, and was a mainstay of the inner line of defense that General Washington established to keep the keep the British away from downtown Brooklyn.
Hi, this is Bruce Friedman for That's Brooklyn. We're here on a solemn occasion at the rededication of the Martyrs Monument in Fort Greene Park, Brooklyn. The sad thing was, a couple of hundred years ago, patriots, privateers, gave their lives on British prison ships in Wallabout Bay, which is now the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And they're in a common grave beneath this monument. But the other sorrow, the other pity, is that Brooklynites, many Brooklynites, don't even know what this monument stands for. And with me today is
Anthony Puglisi, former prisoner of war in the United States. I went to overseas in 1943, and I was 11 months in the front lines and 18 months in the prison. And I've seen a lot of our members perish to protect our country, to defend the United States of America. I went through hell. Thousands of us went through hell. I've seen a lot of my buddies, as an infantryman, seen a lot of our soldiers die. And one soldier, I told, not only one, but many of them, to protect themselves at all times, and not to stay in the open, but to get cover before they get a position for protection. And lo and behold, in Anzio, when we were surrounded, and I was shooting at the Germans, and he called my attention, and telling him to get better protection for himself, he told me to get down to protect myself. And when I looked at him, the bullet missed me, and it got him.
And I want to introduce someone who doesn't rewrite history. He reports it, and his name is John Gallagher.
Oh,
You got so involved, I didn't mention your name.
Oh, that's all right.
But you know
I
something?
got it inside here on
Is it-
my suit, so I know.
It says Field Brothers, but they're gone. No, but you see, I've known John Gallagher for, I don't know, about 5 years for sure.
Thereabouts.
And it's a fascinating thing because I always mention this, but if you live in Brooklyn and you go to public school, you don't learn this. John has a book. It's called The Battle of Brooklyn. But that's not a Board of Education textbook. And it has stories that you've gathered from sources that are not in other history books.
Right.
Because you went to generations past.
And we actually, my wife and I actually walked the territory, which no one else seems to. Everyone others says the British marched 14 miles overnight to get behind the Americans. Well, one day we walked along Kings Highway and up Pennsylvania Avenue and back to Bedford and stopped for a beer. And it felt like we walked 6 miles. On the map it was 6 miles. On my pedometer it was 6 miles. And so when I was finishing my second beer, I wrote down it was in fact 6 miles, not 14. And one wonders where they got that. They moved with 14,000 troops, and I think they like the symmetry. This event here at the Martyrs, Prison Ship Martyrs Memorial in Fort Greene Park is the beginning of something we call Battle Week, a series of 9 events to commemorate the American Revolution and the largest battle of the American Revolution, the Battle of Brooklyn. Normally, you have Veterans Day and you have Memorial Day, and people think of other veterans of other wars. Memorial Day, which was Decoration Day in the South, started as that, as the Civil War or the War for Southern Independence, depending on where you'd be sitting. And then Veterans Day was Armistice Day, and that was First World War veterans and Second Korean and Vietnam War veterans. But it's not usual outside of the Northeast, and not really that usual in the Northeast, to remember our first veterans. These here were merchant seamen who were put on board the prison ships, the hulks in Wallabout Bay, just behind me, because they wouldn't turn coat. They wouldn't volunteer to choose to serve on British ships. So they were condemned as pirates, not as nowadays you have people calling themselves freedom fighters who in actuality would be pirates or at best. These were veterans, and these people need to be remembered. We have this heritage. They learned immediately that liberty and freedom was great, but immediately they learned they had to pay for it. We signed in ink the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776. And then, August 27th, first battle after that, first battle of the American Revolution, our young men, our middle-aged men, farmers and city men, ratified that Declaration of Independence with their own blood. The Battle of Brooklyn is something that not many people know about. It was one we lost, but it was the beginning of the Democratic Wars. We can date modern history from those few hours, that Thursday, August 27th, 1776. Now, we're having a few tours of historic tours. We're having reminiscences. We're having reenactments, and a week from tomorrow we're having the ceremony in Greenwood Cemetery, honoring the Maryland Brigade, its martyrs, and the others who were lost, and the others who fought for us in this Battle of Brooklyn. But one important thing, you see, the word history, the key part of that word is story. Now, it's not a question of dates, names, places, and battles. That can turn people off. But it's the story that's important. And if you go, you may go to a monument, let's say, with a tour by, not a National Park Service ranger, I don't want to get in trouble, but say New York State ranger. They give you a wonderful tour about this building and such. But other than being entertained, you're not learning anything. You're remaining culturally illiterate because they generally don't go off the property lines. They don't tell why this was important in the bigger picture. They don't explain things. I've gone to so many World War II sites where they just tell what happened there and assume that everyone knows what happened during the Second World War.
What you learn in a textbook is nice. It was written by somebody who maybe read another textbook or two. But what you learn from the veterans who went through it all, and maybe, not maybe, definitely, those veterans who were also veterans of the occupation, the prisoners of war, these guys have a story to tell, and it shows quite a bit about endurance and what their country means to them today. Because this gentleman, Harry Hecker, come right here, Harry. Is that right?
Yes, Harry Hecker. Yes.
He's not wearing a knit shirt and khakis. He's wearing his uniform. It's a long time ago from World War II. And you're not hanging on to memories, you're preserving them.
Yes.
So tell us, where were you stationed during the World War II campaigns?
In World War II, I was a few days after D-Day. I went through the whole Normandy campaign, and then Belgium, and in Germany. When we got into Germany, we had a 300-man police force. I was the only one that could speak German. I was the only, so I was designated to ride around with the major, and whenever they ran across situations where we had to yell at the people, get off the roads, the tanks are coming through, or where they catch a man in no man's land, I had to interview him, and I'd scare him, and I would tell him, look, if they catch you again, they're going to take you in the back of the house, they're going to shoot you, see? Because I said, the war's almost over, don't stick out your neck, it's risky. And when we got into Germany, I was in there a few days, and a German patrol, we were going along the Hürtgen forest. The German patrol came through and they ambushed us. And I got shot on the head, I got a 4-inch scar, the sergeant got a bullet hole through the foot, and they took us to the Siegfried line. We stayed there 3 floors down, we stayed in the Siegfried line for 2 days. And then they put us in a car and brought us to the rear. And when we got to the rear, we used to go to work details in Munich all the time. We had 3 things the Germans wanted: soap, tea, and cigarettes. See, that was a big demand. Cigarettes meant everything. It meant everything. And I used to trade sometimes for a bar of soap. You get 2 loaves of bread, and I used to cut the lining of my overcoat and I shoved the bread down there. Otherwise, if you take it to camp, the guards would take it away from you last minute. See.
Were you in a prison camp?
9 months. Yes.
What camp?
9 months. Stalag 7A in Munich. And I tried to escape twice. And every time I was put on bread and water. First time 1 week, and the second time 2 weeks. I was in a small town the second time, and it was never bombed because I had 2 big hospitals in the town. And it was full of civilians because I figured they were safe with the hospital. And on top of the hospital, they had great big crosses painted on the roof. So, but then I was in this jail, and all of a sudden I heard the bombers coming over, and then waves dropped their bomb. The whole room I was in, locked in, was all full of dust. There was no room.
You know, very little changes. Recently we had a retaliatory bombing of terrorist installations.
Yes.
And they claimed it was a pharmaceutical factory.
Yes.
Sounds like painting the Red Cross on the top of the buildings to make you think it's a hospital.
Yeah.
The old stone house is located in J. Byrne Park, which is located at 5th Avenue between 3rd and 4th Street. So there's an awful lot of history in Brooklyn.
Well, I'm John Gallagher, and I write books, and this means the success of 9 years' work by Herb Yellen and a number of the board members to turn this house from Parks Department convenience back into what it should have been. It's an artifact. It's a site of one of the greatest devotions to duty, you could say, the Battle of Brooklyn by the Marylanders who came here, fought, willingly went to their death to save American liberty, and established in blood. In July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed in ink in Philadelphia. Here it was ratified in blood.
Certainly, it would be completely appropriate for tour buses to follow the heritage trail that would trace the course of the battle from its beginning to its end, and to make stops along the way, including here and at the old stone house and other places as they get developed. I mean, there are monuments. They also have to remember that because of the Gowanus Creek, which was very different than today's Gowanus Canal, the part of Brooklyn west of there was almost an island, and that's where the ferry is, and that's where the built-up part of Brooklyn was. So what you would do would have a line of forts to protect that area. You have to remember that the Gowanus Canal is not a natural body of water anymore. It started off as a tidal creek surrounded by marshland. And in the 1850s, the city of Brooklyn decided that to take advantage of the Industrial Revolution, they would turn the Gowanus Creek into an inland canal that factories would want to locate on, who could then, of course, ship by barge into the New York waterway system. Now, that era in American history is over. So now we have the choice of what do we want to do with the Gowanus Canal. I don't think we're going to restore it to the way it was, but we can make it more natural the way it used to be, and look at it from what would be helpful in terms of today's dynamics. I mean, I personally think there should be a state park running around the perimeter with some of the land dedicated to parks, other of the land given over to houses. Others obviously could be commercial. But it's Brooklyn's waterfront is its greatest asset, and we have not used it to anything near its proper potential, and we have the opportunity to do that today, and we really should make this the mission of our politics in the next few years to do this.